I really want to thank also our sponsors for helping make this possible. We have Driving Force, Vancouver Film Studios, Real Green, who, by the way, are putting on a sustainable production training workshop on February 19th. There's posters around with a QR code that you can sign up with. Teamsters 155, DGC Green, which is our national DGC office, has a terrific website. If anyone hasn't looked at it yet, there's a lot of helpful tips on sustainability and production for every department. And Keep It Green Recycling and Whiskey Jack Transport. Thank you all for being here. I want to start by expressing my gratitude to be here on the unceded lands of the Tsleil-Waututh, the Musqueam, and the Squamish people. It's with humility and deep respect for this land that I hope we all agree we must acknowledge the need to take better care of it than we have been. We need to be more sustainable if we hope to restore balance to our ecosystems. I used to think that the film and TV industry wasn't much of a threat to the environment. We're acting, we're putting moving pictures on screen, we're making art. But the Sustainable Entertainment Alliance put out a report in 2021 that compiled the carbon emissions of all kinds of productions across North America. They found that on average, one typical 1-hour episode of scripted drama had an average carbon footprint of 77 metric tons of carbon. What does that look like? 77 metric tons of carbon is the equivalent of 66 homes' energy use for 1 year. It's 120,000 liters of gas driven, or 12,000 propane cylinders for barbecues. And that's just one 1-hour episode. In 2022, we shot 415 TV episodes here in BC, plus 20 features and 124 TV movies. As an industry, we have a lot of work to do. And even though here in BC, we like to think we're greener than elsewhere, the Sustainable Entertainment Alliance's report on feature film carbon emissions showed we averaged way more emissions in Vancouver than Toronto, more than 50% more. Maybe our incredible landscape make us drive further to film them. Maybe we use much bigger generators than we actually need. But fuel consumption is the motion picture industry's largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. Gas and diesel from generators and vehicles make up over half of a production's emissions. The rest comes from mostly studio and accommodation utilities and air travel, which is also fuel. The warming of our planet with toxic emissions from oil and gas is causing our climate to spiral uncontrollably into bigger and more deadly storms, hurricanes and cyclones, because warmer air and warmer water accelerate their speed and strength. Hotter and drier weather make wildfires more likely to rage out of control, as we've just seen so tragically in Los Angeles. But switching to electric vehicles is one tangible step towards reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and reducing our dependence on oil and gas. And they are getting used on sets. Virgin River Season 6 had 14 EVs, from cast cars to trucks. Diner Bear, currently filming here, also has some in their fleet. As you can see all around us, they range from Teslas, Mustangs, Kias, and Hummers for above-the-line talent, to e-cargo vans, pickups, 3 tons to 5 tons, Class 7 and Class 8 trucks. You can rent a Cybertruck as a picture vehicle, or an electric Rivian with a camera arm. They're here, and today's your chance to check them out. Hydrogen is another promising fuel of the future. It can be extracted from water by splitting the hydrogen from oxygen by using electrolyzation. If done from BC's 98% hydroelectric power grid, it's a very clean process. It can be used for transportation as well as power generation. Hydrogen jennies for film sets are being developed right now, both here and in Toronto, and are already powering sets in the UK. A BC company called H-Tech has a small but growing network of clean hydrogen filling stations in BC, and have brought a hydrogen-powered Toyota Mirai here today. Its only emission is a trickle of water and some vapor. They also offer full maintenance leases of Class 8 hydrogen-powered trucks. The great news is that by helping the environment, you're also going to save hundreds or more off your overall fuel budget. You will have to get used to coordinating charge times and places. You will pay a slight premium for the rental, and there will be electricity charges, but it doesn't compare to zero fuel costs. EVs also have less moving parts than internal combustion engine vehicles, which normally translates to less maintenance. Are they reliable? Modern EVs entered the market in 2010. A study quoted by the EPA on their website showed that since 2016, EV batteries have had less than a 0.05% failure rate, and most of those would have been covered by the manufacturer's warranty. Norway leads the world in EV adoption. In 2024, 85% of new cars sold in Norway were electric, and they're a cold country in winter, so it can be done. Until we go fully electric, what else can we do on set fuel-wise? Well, there's hybrids. We can also implement a no idling policy on set. Idling is already illegal per City of Vancouver bylaws, but maybe those fuel cost savings can translate to a designated trailer or office for drivers to wait in. ADs can improve communication about cast movement so that drivers aren't having to keep cars cool or hot for hours unnecessarily. For any remaining diesel-powered trucks, some productions have had a tank of renewable diesel right on their studio lot. You can have it installed with the help of Suncor Petro-Canada. Who here knows what renewable diesel is? RD is a fuel made from waste organic oils, vegetable and animal, treated and processed to be a drop-in equivalent to diesel, usable by any regular diesel vehicle without any modifications or risk of clogging or damage to the fuel system. It does still create emissions, though less, but more importantly, oil and gas stays in the ground. And there's a growing range of clean tech electric batteries to replace diesel Jennies as well. Plug in to charge, use, then charge it back up. And if they're being recharged using an already existing diesel Jenny, say at the circus, chances are you're actually helping that Jenny run more efficiently because so often they run way below capacity. What about charging EVs? VFS, Vancouver Film Studios, right here has 16 chargers on their lot, not to mention solar panels, a green roof, and beehives for even more green cred. Thank you to VFS for having us here. Other studios are installing them too. Parkland, who owns Chevron, has just installed 2 ultra-fast chargers on boundary between Grandview and Canada Way, 5 minutes away from here or Bridge Studios. Whiskey Jack, Norman Hunger, and Driving Force, all of whom are here today, rent portable chargers as well. Before we talk to our panel of PMs, a transport coordinator, a sustainability advisor, and a company building off-grid emission-free mobile dressing rooms for the industry, we're going to hear from BC Hydro about transportation electrification here in BC, the pros and cons, the rebates, and the charging infrastructure. So please join me in welcoming Blake Veerman, Product Manager, Incentive Programs and Rates for Transportation Electrification at BC Hydro.
Thank you very much, Annabelle. And thanks everybody for being here today, and really appreciate being welcomed to share some information with you all. So what I was asked for is just a user-focused overview of some of the resources available to help EV drivers plan their trips, understand and maybe get past some of the range anxiety that is predominant for the first month of EV ownership typically, and then a quick brief mention of the programs that we have to help you support, whether it's personally or with a film fleet. Make that transition. So first of all, who am I? So I'm Blake Veerman. I manage the programs that help customers make the switch to EVs within the province of BC, within the BC Hydro service area. I work closely with some others in this audience too. You see JM from Plug-in BC. You know, I think we live in a really great province in terms of the amount of support and the amount of progress that's happened on electrifying transportation. I'm a really big believer in helping people have, you know, a really comfortable, great lifestyle while still reducing their emissions footprint. And I really think that's possible. So my background is in electrical engineering. I did that for 10 years before switching over to managing these programs last year. And, you know, I really envision that future where we don't have to think about that little puff coming out the back of our vehicles that looks like, you know, that cute little swirl of exhaust on a cold winter day. But then when you imagine it and you think about it and you start to say, like, how much is that over the life of the vehicle? And you realize that even that small hatchback, you know, by the time it's driven 200,000 kilometers, has filled up a balloon that would be 65 meters tall of carbon dioxide, not to mention that the other kind of combustion products that are polluting our local air. So I really am glad to be talking to you here today. Really excited to see the amount of electric vehicles and tools available to the film industry. And we'll share some of my own experiences as well as some of the knowledge I have about driving EVs in the province of BC. So first, ownership experience. So of course there's benefits, but I'd never not talk about some of the considerations you have to make at the same time. So I already mentioned the reducing emissions, and Annabelle already mentioned the savings on fuel. Late last fall, Clean Energy Canada finished a study. They found that throughout Canada, switching to an EV on a personal level is a cost saving over the life of the vehicle, even considering that higher capital upfront cost. So that's both kind of film sets, where we're talking about, and in your personal lives. That is partly thanks to the maintenance, and then the quieter, quicker, smoother. So I think this is something we don't talk about often enough, is the driving experience. So story from my own life is that in 2021, my parents made the switch of one of their vehicles to EV, thinking it would be for around town. And actually just last week, they traded in their gas car for a second EV. And the reason wasn't about cost savings. They already were doing most of their driving in an electric vehicle. It was about driving experience. They had come home from a long road trip on snowy, icy roads, which is what they had kind of kept their all-wheel drive gas vehicle for. And they got home and my mom said, I just prefer driving the electric one, having the regenerative braking to have very precise amounts of slowing down, going down the hills, the quieter, environment. So I think that's a pretty cool point, that sometimes focusing in on emissions, we can jump past, is that emissions, affordability, and kind of driving experience. Of course, we also have perks, whether it's the HOV lane, although as the number of EVs goes up, they might start looking a little full. I'm going to call this a conditional perk, which we'll get into on the considerations, which is always leave home with a full tank, right? There's nothing like, having a busy week, and your gas tank's getting empty, and you're trying to get somewhere, but now you got to stop for gas, and it's -5 out, and the wind's blowing sideways, and you got to stand there holding the pump, because the little click never works, right? It's lets you go and scrub your windshields at the same time. So if you can charge at home, not only does that save you a lot of money, but now you always get to leave home with a full tank. Of course, this is, they do tend to be more expensive, and we're seeing some lower cost models come in, but there's kind of, that's slower in North America, right? We've made some decisions that keep some of the lower cost options off our market. Depending on your driving needs, might really consider that, but I challenge this a little bit. So I've done some pretty significant road trips to some pretty unique places. I rent different EVs to try them out instead of owning one, because I'm just that much of a nerd when it comes to this stuff, right? So certain trips can definitely be a challenge, and I'd say kind of think about your trips and what would they look like with an EV. So most of mine I found really don't change. I took one EV on a 7,000 kilometer trip in 14 days where I was hiking through a number of national parks in the US. And having the EV really didn't change the dynamics. It was an EV that could charge really fast. The charging stations were really reliable. And the EV would plan the trip for us so that we knew where to stop. And the friend I was doing this with would just kind of go on and we'd look at what was around the charging station. And if we were feeling like coffee and the charging station it had picked had ice cream, then we'd switch it to a different charging station with coffee. Because when you're driving that far, at some point you got to stop and do a liquid exchange anyways, right? So within BC as well, if most of your trips are in BC, I'll get to a slide a little bit later, but there's an amazing charging network throughout BC, a number of providers, including the completion of the full highway network BC Hydro completed last year, where there's a charging station at least every 150 kilometers along the roadways. So if your trips are within BC, you're quite well covered, regardless of vehicle type. So that's the driving needs and considering when and where you're going to charge and long trips all covered. If you're someone, I know I have some friends who they really do a different job of long trips. You know, they just drive, and I don't know how they do that. My body doesn't let me. You know, maybe for some people, consider how that trip is, and you might choose a plug-in hybrid option instead. I'm a huge fan, though. I do a lot of big road trips, and I'd still go full EV if I was to go back from renting different ones to try. Winter and summer, range does vary, and this is something I'd say to consider when you're picking a model, right? So the capabilities vary. Features like heat pumps can really impact how much your winter performance is. So you might have a vehicle where you're getting 10% less range in the winter. You might have a vehicle where the drop is more than that if it's using kind of resistive heating. There's a lot of cool technology out there from vehicle manufacturers, whether it's, some are doing heated windshields, the heated steering wheel helps you keep the cabin cooler to reduce that heating the cabin demand. So really kind of look into that ability of the vehicle that you're considering would be something I'd suggest. And then once you have your EV, there's resources. So these are links, which I recognize isn't going to work in this environment, but I have some QR codes on the last page. But of course, BC Hydro, we have our EV app. You can activate charging not only on BC Hydro's chargers, but also on Shell's and Flow and ChargePoint, so some other networks as well. And then we have various programs I'll cover later. There's also Plug-in BC, Viva, Plug and Drive, Emotive. You're welcome to Google these. These are some resources that can help you in kind of planning for that EV ownership experience. Well, as mentioned, charging at home, much easier, also much cheaper, right? When you look at your electric bill options and what you're paying per kilowatt versus what you're paying per kilowatt at public charging stations, you'll notice charging at home tends to be your cheapest option. Public charging is also level 2, level 3. There's 7, so level 2, right, is your kind of like drier circuit. So that's, a longer stop. Maybe you're watching a movie. You're going to be charging for 2 or 3 hours. Or maybe you're having a picnic in the park, whereas level 3 is your fast charging for as you're doing a trip. There's 7 networks in BC. Mentioned BC Hydro, ChargePoint, Flow, Shell Recharge, PetroCan, Tesla, and On the Run. So there's quite a few players adding charging stations all over. And for planning your trip, I definitely strongly recommend these 2 at the top. This is a personal recommendation here. It's not a corporate recommendation, this is a personal one. So ABRP is a better route planner. I use that to kind of like sketch out my overall road trips. Where am I going to have my charging stops if I'm going on a route that I haven't done before? And then PlugShare is something I do because people rate charging stations for their reliability. There's certain areas, unfortunately, where vandalism can be a real issue on charging stations. I noticed that when I went to Seattle recently. So PlugShare gives me a heads up before I go there whether that charging station is going to be working. All right, I'm cutting close to time, so we're going to go pretty quickly here, but this is just to say, where do you want to go in BC? This is just BC Hydro's charging network, and you can see, it was a pretty proud thing last year, kind of the major highway routes. We have chargers along them all to really enable the transfer. This is changing all the time. As of a couple weeks ago, we were at 135 sites with 450 connectors, but we're going to have 3,000 connectors by the end of 2030. So we're adding these sites very quickly to help match the adoption of EVs. If you own sites that you think would be a good host for public charging, you can reach out and give your contact information afterwards. And we're starting to get into like some of these heavy-duty trucks, setting up stations for those as well. Programs. So, who already has an EV? Yeah, that's a pretty solid adoption network. So who doesn't yet? All right. So for those that don't yet, on your home level, and I'll have a QR code at the end that'll get you to these. We have rebates whether you're in a single-family home, multi-unit residential, or maybe you have employees and you want to let them charge at work. We have programs to support adding chargers there. Most of these programs are supported by the provincial government, and then some of the single-family home ones are BC Hydro direct. We also have incentives for fleets. So if you have, a number of filming vehicles that you own as a company and multiple employees share, we can provide you with resources to help you study how would I turn these into electric vehicles, how would I make that shift, and then support the infrastructure as well. Part of that program is also film kiosks. So if anyone's done some filming out in Maple Ridge and plugged into the new film kiosk out there, we're really happy to support municipalities to put in those electric film kiosks. Huge carbon reductions compared to the diesel generators and cost savings too. And then I just want to mention as well, within BC, there's also vehicle rebates. So that's both on passenger vehicles as well as supported, not through us, is the commercial vehicle one. So there's some Clean BC, Plug in BC. I want to give some credit for some of these programs. And I'll leave this up for a minute in case you want to get to any of these links that were on former slides. So there's a QR code here for our EV kind of consumer info and programs, the fleet programs, as well as the film kiosk program. The film kiosk program, I know Real Green is here. Basically anything that's on their priority list for sites is something that we'd be really happy to work with the municipality in that location to help kind of put in a kiosk so that the filming there can happen off of 98% clean green power instead of a diesel generator. And I think the communities around it usually appreciate that as well. So with that, it's it. I don't see anyone taking pictures anymore, so I'll go to a closing slide. Feel free to find me in the crowd over the next little while if you want to follow up on any of the programs, any infos, just have a chat about EVs. And thank you very much for your time, and I'll give it back to Annabelle.